Hello, I'm Shyam Menon. I've been on the course team of the Diploma in Higher Education. I used to be on the faculty in IGNOU, and now I'm on the faculty in the Central Institute of Education and Technology, Delhi. Today I'm here to talk to you about one of the most important and most commonly used methods of teaching at higher education, and that is lecture. It's in fact ironical that lecture is the much maligned monster, so to say. In the sense, people do talk a great deal about the limitations of lecture, but then paradoxically, that is the method that is most commonly used in colleges and universities. One reason people often give for using lecture is that we have to address large classes, and probably this is the most effective way of communicating. The second is the kind of curriculum load that is being given to us and which we are asked to cover within course every year. So that leaves us very less time for other more innovative methods of teaching. Whatever be the reason, lecture seems to be utilized as a very effective method by a few very good teachers. One way in which they negotiate with the problem of making use of lecture is by introducing in it elements of interaction. They don't just do lecture as a monotonous, unidirectional flow of information, but rather it would be a lot of discussion will be built in it. As we can see in one of the clippings we'll show you just now of Dr. Jayashree Mathur. She teaches in the Delhi University, and in her class we can find that there is a great deal of interaction that she incorporates within her lecture, and that's what makes a lecture very effective. Let's see how she does this bit of lecture.
Let's now move to a larger class where the teacher, Jayashree Mathur, is giving her students a lecture on the agencies of education.
What else? Anyone else? Depending on the role ascribed to the male or female child, you will probably find
the large class responds actively to her cues and promptings, which she has skillfully woven into her lecture. In a class as large as this, the lecture method is a desirable and effective technique to use.
Even though they can go to school, it's because there is something wrong with the schooling system. It's not encouraging, they look upon it as work. So we can connect to education.
One aspect that one has to emphasize is the importance of preparation in lecture. Often people would say that a teacher is an artist. Teaching is an art and not a science, and not something which one can very consciously inculcate. If one is a born teacher. I really do not think that there is much validity in this kind of observations. I do feel that even good, intelligent minds with ordinary communication skills can do well as a classroom lecturer, provided one takes pain, one puts in a little bit of an effort to improve one's lecture. One aspect of lecture that one can't overemphasize ever is the importance of preparation. However much well-versed one may be, on the subject matter about which the lecture is going to be based, there needs to be thorough preparation about what will be dealt with, in what sequence, how exactly this whole experience be organized, and what kind of teaching aids be used in that, how will interaction be incorporated within the lecture, and so on. Structuring a lecture becomes therefore extremely important. I've always found that a device like the overhead projector comes to our help in structuring a lecture. If one has to really plan out a lecture, one can always do that on a transparency, on an overhead projector transparency right in advance, so that when we project the transparency here, that would more or less give an overview of what is going to come in that lecture, and also that would more or less present the flow of elements of this lecture and the kind of logical connection that might exist in between, and so on. And this structuring device, more than anything else, is the major characteristic of the overhead projector. It is not just a novelty, but it actually helps one to structure one's lecture and utilize the same transparencies for more than one classrooms, or for more than one lesson. If one is teaching a set of classes and transacting the same kind of content in many classes, then it would come really handy in really going with a standardized, more or less standardized package of information, knowledge, and also the heuristics incorporated within a lecture. So much about preparation. Those who are well versed in and experienced in teaching always give a great deal of emphasis, and they seem to think that it's very important to how exactly one begins a lecture, how one conducts the lecture, and how one concludes the lecture. I really don't want to go into those details right now because of the paucity time, but I would certainly say that time management becomes extremely important. If we have a 40 minutes or 1 hour lecture to negotiate with, then I would advise that we should try and think that not more than 50 to 60% of the total time should be utilized for the teacher-dominated interaction. I think something like 40 to 50% should be earmarked for student-centered interaction. In other words, there should be scope for eliciting responses from the students as and when the lecture progresses. This makes lecture extremely versatile and also participative. Preparation, while preparing for a lecture and carrying out a lecture and doing a lecture, one can keep the following thing in mind. Basic information which students, especially adults, young adults, who mainly the students of higher education are, basic information which the young adults can pick up on their own, can learn on their own, should be provided to them for self-study. A classroom lecture is in a way something which is more than that. In fact, the scope of classroom lecture is more for interaction, and it can also be used as a heuristic device, not just merely throwing bits of information, unrelated information at the students. Even if a very logically organized lecture, very skillfully delivered lecture can become less effective if it is entirely didactic. If there isn't a dialoguing, if there isn't a scope of interaction between the students and teachers. Therefore, I would certainly think that the basic information which has to be provided in classroom should be reserved for self-study. The teacher should essentially suggest textbooks and other source materials for the students to do self-study with, and the classroom session should be essentially utilized for something which is based on whatever information they have gathered through their self-study. That makes it much more versatile. This is precisely what Sohini Ghosh, who is teaching in Jamia Millia Islamia, says in one of the interviews which we conducted with her. We will show you now an excerpt from the interview with Shrovini Ghosh.
One is a didactic kind of a teaching model where I am the lecturer and I am just telling my students, or rather talking down to them, telling them that this is this. Now, I personally feel that all the readings that we generally do in class should be done at home. Class should be left for interaction and discussion. And I am absolutely positive that perhaps it will vary in degree. Maybe you cannot make an economics class as interactive as, say, a class on interaction or human interaction. But still, it can be interactive. If we once realize that there is nothing wrong in interaction, and just do all our readings at home, because all I remember of my college days, when I was doing my BA in English, is that half the time we were reading the text in class. You're not supposed to read the text in class. I mean, you're supposed to read the text at home. Class is for discussion. What's the point in all of our getting together if we don't discuss things in class? I want to know what you think. I want to know what others think. And there's no point in my just sitting and reading the text. I can do that by myself.
There is a great deal of histrionics involved in teaching. I'm not suggesting that all classroom teachers in colleges and universities need to be drama actors, theatre actors. I'm not suggesting that. All I'm trying to say is that for effective communication, even casual effective communication, we'll find that there is something like being natural. There is something like using one's eyes and hands and gestures and so on. Not to be extremely over dramatic, but essentially to drive home a certain point. I would just imagine if one has to just stand stiff and deliver a lecture in a monotonous kind of a voice, without modulation of one's voice, without looking at the students to whom one is lecturing. It can be extremely dull. We have seen several such lectures when we were students, I'm sure. Talking about gestures, I've seen several people who, when they address a group, like in a classroom, standing on a dais, they really wouldn't know what to do with their hands. This becomes a pair of unnecessary appendages. They would sometimes hide their hands behind them in shame, or then put their hands in their pocket, or then tightly keep their hands like that, or they fiddle with their wristwatch or a ring or a handkerchief. This can be extremely distracting to the students. They would most of the time look at what this man is doing with the handkerchief rather than what he is saying. So this can be, I think, consciously avoided. Everybody, when they start teaching, become extremely nervous, and out of nervousness they resort to this kind of behaviors. But these are things which one can consciously avoid. Another point I would like to emphasize is the importance or the need of looking at movement in a classroom carefully. In a way, classroom is like a stage. There is and the lecture is almost like a choreography. And I'm not overemphasizing this point, but nonetheless it's important. There isn't much point in just standing at a certain spot and doing a 1-hour lecture. There can be a little bit of a meaningful movement about in the classroom. I have always found it extremely useful to move among the students occasionally. In fact, you should understand that a classroom is a very heterogeneous group. There are people who are in a position to get access to you and what you say, and there are others who do not have that facility to get access to you and what you say. So it would really help if you move about in the among the students also as part of your lecture. I've also seen people, for the sake of movement, they resort to what can be called a simple harmonic motion, which is very distracting. Like when one speaks, one goes on doing this kind of motion over and over again. This would look as though this person is some kind of a lion or a tiger in a cage in a zoo. It can be extremely distracting, something which one can avoid. There are certain hints, I would call it hints, which I would like to term as communication boosters. There are certain things which a teacher can resort to which would boost the communication. And the most important among them is the constant attempt at eliciting feedback. The attempt at eliciting feedback need not be by asking questions. It can be even by looking around at students and seeing whether they are looking at you, whether they are nodding knowingly, whether they have gestures of understanding, they have a smile of having discovered something new, or that they have a poker face and disinterested look, or a yawn, or maybe some other activity going on in the classroom, etc. So this constant looking at the group of students individually, not as though they are a mass of humanity, faceless humanity out there in front of you, but as individuals, is extremely important. And another thing that is to be emphasized is the way in which you pace the content points which you are going to present in the lecture. There isn't much point in utilizing 25 minutes or 30 minutes on 1 or 2 points, and the rest of the 9 points you finish in 5 minutes. That's very bad time management. And a related thing is the pausing. Learning doesn't take place simultaneously as sensations do. What I'm trying to say is that a teacher might put forth a certain very interesting concept to be learned by the student. But learning takes time. The students require time to register what the teacher is talking about. So pause is an extremely important communication device. It need not be meaningless pauses, but a constant stream of words which the teacher is uttering without any stop here and there can really affect communication. Then diversions, not digressions, from the way from the main course of lecture is also an important device. One can think of humor, one can think of illustrations and examples, and so on. I would in conclusion say that there can be 2 major characteristics which a lecturer should have. The one is sensitivity, and the other is a sense of humor. And with these 2, I'm sure one can make a very successful lecturer. At the end of this program, I would like to present to you an excerpt from an interview which we conducted with Faisal Al-Kasi, in which he talks about what an effective teacher can try and accomplish, can try and accommodate within a lecture. Why don't you listen to that?
I think it's a very fossilized idea which has gone out of vogue in the 50s, that the teacher knows all of what he's about and the student is some dull, empty vessel that you have to stuff full of all kinds of notions. I think that's a very antiquated notion of teaching. It is something that's changing in every subject matter that you're teaching, the things that are changing every day. And very often your student is well informed about it. He's not somebody who knows nothing about that area. And you build on that, and you have to always see that you are several rungs ahead of the students. You're up with the latest in the field. You're able to draw on what is available in the resources of the city as a teaching bank for yourself. You have to draw in audiovisual aids into the classroom to be able to teach. All these are very essential part of teaching, because you know how effective those methods are. You're not using it because it's novel. You're using because it's an effective technique of teaching. After your job as a teacher is communication. You know, and I feel like in the same way as we train teachers in their disciplines to teach history, or to teach economics, or to teach political science, in the same way they need to be taught how to teach. There's no course for people at the university level. At least at the school level you do a B.Ed, but to get a job in a college, there's no course of how you teach or how you communicate. So many people that I've learned from in college and at the master's level have been people who are very poor communicators, who speak very good in their subject, but even when they speak, it takes you 4 or 5 classes to understand what they're saying. There's no emphasis even just on speech. To teach, you have to be able to speak. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to have eye contact. You've got to get the interest of the students. You have to be up with what is the latest in your field. You have to know what your students are about. All those things. I don't think you can sit back and feel, oh, if I know the subject matter well, I will just pick up some set of notes and read them out without an eye contact in a dull and dry, boring voice, without any variation and feel I'm communicating. Teaching is communicating.
I've been talking to you a great deal about all these gestures and eye contact and voice modulation and body movements and humor and so on. Please do not get away with the impression that I am underemphasizing the importance of scholarship. I do believe that for an effective lecture, the most important ingredient is the mastery that the teacher has about the content point that he or she is going to transact in the classroom. I really feel that the scholarship and the understanding, the scholarly understanding of the content matter is the most important prerequisite for a good lecture. However, many good teachers, very scholarly teachers, many times overestimate the ability of the students, even adult students, to understand abstractions. They transact their content point in abstractions, and they expect the students to understand whatever they are trying to say. It wouldn't be here redundant to emphasize on devices which a teacher can make use of to augment the effectiveness of communication. I here mean devices such as the most commonly used device in a classroom, namely a blackboard or an overhead projector. Devices also could mean things like maps, charts, models, and so on. Many times, even adult students are really not in a position to understand the linkages which a teacher is trying to put forth in abstraction without having concretely seen those linkages in operation in an actual situation. And these devices really help to bring forth and drive home those linkages.